Hey, what up, guys? This is Ryan with Brainstorm. So square roots looks like this, right? There's like this weird little symbol. That means the square root of 25. And what a square root is it's kind of tricky. When you first learn it, it's like half trial and error, half memorization. And after a while, you kind of get them all figured out. But square root means what times itself equals this number, right? What times itself equals 25. And you can be like, well, I mean, that's why trial and error kind of works. Like, well, is it 3? Well, I don't know. What's 3 times 3, right? Is 3 times 3 25? And you're like, no, that's a bummer. It's too small. I don't know. Maybe it's 4, right? 4 times 4. And you're like, well, no, that's 16. And so you're getting there. And then you're like, wait a minute. It's 5 times 5 equals 25. So yes, that totally is it. And so what is the answer to the square root of 25? It's not 5 times 5. It's just 5, the single number 5. Because this squared is 25, right? So that's kind of weird when you first do it. Well, what about something like this? What's the square root of 36, right? You can be like, it's not 3, it's too small. I don't think 4. Wait a minute, 6, because 6 times 6 is 36. So outside, the root of 36 would be 6, not 6 squared, anything like that. It's just 6, right? So you get the hang of it. So what I recommend is we'll do the first like 15, and you can kind of memorize them. It's kind of helpful, so you don't have to totally think about it every time. But it's the same process, so watch. Okay, and so this is the first, like, up to 15, right? Square root of 1 is probably the hardest because it's the easiest. What times itself is 1? That'd just be 1. 1 times 1 is 1, right? What about the square root of 4? Wasn't that 2 because 2 squared, or 2 times 2 is 4. Square root of 9 is 3, right? And obviously you can fill these out because you know we're doing them in order. Square root of 16 is 4. 4 squared is 16. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 36 is 6. Root of 49, some people just say root to be cool. It's square root, but you could say root. Root of 49 is 7, right? Because 7 times 7 is 49. Root of 64 is 8. Root of 81 is 9. Root of 100 is weird. It's 10 because 10 times 10 is 100. 121 is 11. And once you get up in these high numbers, it's okay to use a calculator, right? You can say, well, let me check. I'm going to check my calculator. 11 times 11. Sure enough, it's 121. So yes, the root of 121 is 11. 144 is 12. 169 is 13, 196 is 14, all the way up to 225 is 15. So these are kind of like ones to keep in your pocket. Much bigger than 15, just use a calculator. These ones, though, it wouldn't totally hurt to memorize. And the reason why you're going to be like, hey, Ryan, this might be the dumbest, easiest quiz in the world. The square root of this, I could just put in a calculator. There is one thing about square roots, it's kind of tricky, and you're going to use these square roots that you know or that they're really easy to figure out to solve the following. And when they say something like estimate, now watch this. They might say, hey, the square root of 30 is between what two numbers? In other words, roughly where is the root of 30? Because unfortunately, there's a lot of roots that just don't have a whole number answer. There is no square root of 30 as a whole number because you're like, well, let me think, 4 times 4, no, 5 times 5. So there's nothing that comes out exactly 30 when you square it. So how do we do this? This is the tricky part, right? We're going to find a number squared below it and above it. So if you picture like root 30 here, right? We're going to find two numbers, one below it and one above it. All right, so let's do this. So, well, I don't know. I mean, this is totally trial and error. I want a number squared that is less than 30. So you're like, well, what about 3 squared? That's 9. Sure, it could be that, but that's too small. What's 4 squared? 16. What's 5 squared? 5 squared is 25, right? 5 squared equals 25. And then 6 squared is 36. That's perfect because isn't 5 squared below it and then 6 squared above it because that's 36? And so we know that this root falls somewhere between 5 and 6 as a number because, again, 5 squared would be below it and 6 squared would be above it. Is that weird? That's kind of tricky, right? I mean, the way we write this here looks pretty cluttery and confusing, but again, we know this comes out to some decimal. And it can't be, this is not root 25, so it's not as low as 5. And it's not root 36, so it's not as high as 6, so it's somewhere in between. All right, let's try a bunch more. Okay, now root 53, right? Root 53 is between what two numbers? So I want something below it and something above it. Well, I'm kind of thinking, isn't 7 4? So here's my root 53, right? And I want a number below it and above it. This is some decimal. Who knows what it is? There is no root 53. It's some crazy decimal. But I know that there's a number, an even root below it and an even root above it. isn't 7 squared 49? So if I did 7 squared, that'd be 49. That's close to it. And then what's 8 squared? That's 64. So yes, these two numbers are to the left and right of it, or in other words, smaller than it and bigger than it. And so let me show you, maybe it makes more sense. So the answer to this would be 7 and 8 are the two numbers below it and above it. But let me get this wrong. That might make even more sense if we do it wrong, so you see how that doesn't work. Right? We know the answer already. We did it. But let's say I was wrong and I said, well, let's try 3 and 4. Is root 53 between 3 and 4? Well, when you square these, don't I get 9 and 16? Is 53 between 9 and 16? No. And that's why this is largely trial and error. Okay, well, let me go way bigger and say, well, I have no idea. So what if I tried 8 and 9, right? Is it between 8 and 9? Well, I don't know. 8 squared is 64. And 9 squared is 81. Is 53 between those two? No. So this can't be 8 and 9. That's why this is tricky. And when I kind of introduced a video, I said a lot of trial and error and a little bit of memorization. So hang in there. All right, let's do one more problem, and let's see if you can get this one before I do. Okay, now we have root 12 is between what two numbers? So here's root 12, right? And we know there's two numbers before it and after. And we know root 12 is not really rootable for a whole number. It'd be some weird decimal. So let's think. Let's kind of trial and error. And maybe I'll take a little longer to get this one right so you see the process. Well, I don't know. Is it between 2 and 3? Maybe. I don't know. What's 2 squared? 2 squared is 4. And 3 squared is 9. Is 12 between 4 and 9? No. So that was my first try, my first guess. It was a good guess, but it was wrong. Okay, now I'm going to jump way up. Whoops, did not mean to make that little mark. So now that didn't work, so I'm going to try way higher. Maybe I'll try like, what about 5 and 6? Root 12 might be between 5 and 6. Who knows? Well, 5 squared is 25. 6 squared is 36. Is 12 between those? Oh, man. Now I went too high. I overshot. So let me try again. Well, let me see. Root 12, some decimal. Maybe it's between 3 and 4. Who knows? Okay, so 3 squared would be 9. And 4 squared would be 16. Is 9 between, is 12 between 9 and 16? Totally, this combination works. So root 12 is somewhere between 3 and 4. All right, is that cool? And you notice that root 12 is not between 9 and 16. That was just to figure it out. The answers were 3 and 4 because if you put this in a calculator, it'd be like 3 point something. So root 12 is between 3 and 4. And the way we figured it out was by squaring both and seeing if 12 fell in that range. All right, a little tricky, but hang in there. You got this. And importantly, remember those first square roots all the way from 1 to 15. Memorize those suckers, or at least, be really quick at figuring them out because that'll help in the long run. All right, you guys, good luck.